If you can't afford better places, don't act picky. The words landed harder than the silver fork against the porcelain plate. For a brief second, the elegant dining room of the Grand Meridian Hotel went strangely quiet. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden reflections across polished marble floors. Soft piano music drifted through the air. Waiters moved between tables carrying expensive entrees worth more than some people spent on groceries in a week. Yet all of that luxury suddenly felt distant. Maya Brooks lowered her eyes to the plate in front of her. The grilled sea bass looked beautiful at first glance, arranged carefully beside roasted vegetables and a lemon garnish. But appearances could only hide so much. The smell had reached her before the first bite. Sour, wrong, unmistakable. She had spent enough years traveling to know the difference between a mistake and neglect. Slowly, she set down her fork. Around her, conversations resumed. Glasses clinked softly. A businessman laughed at something his colleague said 2 tables away. Nobody paid attention to the woman sitting alone near the window overlooking downtown Atlanta. At least, nobody except the waiter standing beside her. Ethan Collins wore a perfectly pressed white jacket and a confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. He glanced at Maya's simple navy coat draped over the back of her chair. Then he looked at her carry-on suitcase resting beside the table. The look lasted less than a second, but Maya caught it. She had seen that look before. It was the look people gave when they believed they had already figured out your worth. "Is there a problem?" Ethan asked. His voice sounded polite enough for anyone listening nearby. Maya lifted her gaze calmly. "Yes," she said. "I believe this fish has spoiled." Ethan stared at the plate. Then he laughed softly through his nose. "That's impossible." Maya remained composed. "Would you mind having the kitchen check it?" Ethan crossed his arms. "Ma'am, our chef has been here for 12 years. I understand." "Then maybe trust the professionals." A few nearby guests glanced over. Maya noticed one woman pause halfway through a sip of wine. Another guest looked down quickly, pretending not to listen. The piano continued playing. The smell from the plate lingered. Maya could have raised her voice. She could have demanded a manager immediately. Instead, she simply waited. Ethan's smile grew thinner. "Honestly," he said, leaning slightly closer, "if you can't afford better places, don't act picky." This time several people heard it. The silence spread like a ripple across the room. Maya felt dozens of eyes briefly shift toward her. Some curious, some uncomfortable, some already assuming she must have done something wrong. Ethan straightened his jacket and looked satisfied with himself. But Maya didn't react the way he expected. She didn't argue. She didn't look embarrassed. She simply folded her napkin carefully and placed it beside her plate. Then she asked a question. "What's your name?" Ethan blinked. "Excuse me? Your name?" He pointed to his badge. "Ethan Collins." Maya nodded once. "Thank you." Something about her calmness unsettled him. "Why?" he asked. Maya's eyes drifted across the dining room. The golden lights, the spotless tables, the employees moving quickly between guests, the polished image of perfection. Then she looked back at him. "I just like knowing who I'm speaking with." For the first time that evening, Ethan's confidence wavered ever so slightly. And somewhere beyond the dining room, completely unseen by everyone present, events had already begun moving toward a moment that would change the entire hotel forever. The uneasy look on Ethan's face vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. He forced a smile and picked up the plate. "I will have the kitchen inspect it," he said, though his tone carried more irritation than professionalism. Maya nodded politely. "Thank you." Ethan turned and disappeared through the swinging doors leading into the kitchen. The dining room slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed. Silverware clinked against plates. A server refilled wine glasses near the center of the room. Yet Maya noticed something interesting. Several guests were still watching her from the corners of their eyes. Not because of the meal, because of how she had responded. Most people would have argued. Most people would have demanded attention. Maya simply sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, as though she had nowhere else to be. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No replacement meal arrived. No apology came. The empty chair across from her remained untouched. Outside the massive windows, evening sunlight reflected off the skyscrapers downtown, painting the glass with shades of orange and gold. Maya reached into her handbag and removed a small black notebook. She opened it and wrote a few words. The movement was calm and deliberate. At a nearby table, a middle-aged couple exchanged curious glances. Across the room, a young hostess noticed it too. She watched Maya writing and immediately looked away when their eyes almost met. Something about the woman seemed different. Not important, not powerful, just completely unshaken. The kitchen doors opened again. Ethan emerged carrying a fresh plate. He set it down without a word. The fish looked perfect. Steam rose gently from the surface. Maya studied it briefly. "Thank you," she said. Ethan did not respond. Instead, he started to walk away. "One more thing," Maya said. He stopped. Slowly. "Who is the evening operations manager?" Ethan turned back. "Why? I would like to know." His jaw tightened. "Richard Walker." Maya wrote the name down. Ethan stared at the notebook. "Are you some kind of inspector?" he asked. Maya smiled faintly. "No." "Then why are you taking notes?" She closed the notebook. "Because details matter." Ethan laughed awkwardly. "You are taking this very seriously. Food safety should be taken seriously." For a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan shook his head and walked away. From across the room, another employee approached him. They exchanged a few quiet words. Both glanced toward Maya. One of them frowned. The other laughed. Maya noticed but pretended not to. Instead, she tasted the replacement meal. This time it was fresh, properly prepared, exactly what should have arrived the first time. Yet somehow that did not make her feel better. Because the problem had never been the fish. The problem was everything that happened after. Nearly 20 minutes later, a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit entered the restaurant. Several employees immediately straightened their posture. Conversations among the staff became sharper and more careful. The hostess hurried toward him. Richard Walker had arrived. He listened as she quietly explained something near the entrance. Then his eyes shifted toward Maya. He did not approach immediately. Instead, he stood perfectly still, studying her from across the dining room. Maya noticed the look. Experienced. Calculating. The look of a man deciding what kind of person he believed she was before speaking a single word. Then Richard adjusted his suit jacket and began walking directly toward her table. Richard Walker stopped beside the table and offered the kind of smile that had probably calmed hundreds of unhappy guests over the years. It was practiced, measured, and carefully controlled. "Good evening," he said. "I am Richard Walker, the operations manager. I understand there was a concern with your meal." Maya looked up calmly. There was. Richard nodded as though the issue had already been solved. "I have been informed that the kitchen replaced the entree immediately." "After some discussion," Maya replied. Richard pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without being invited. Around the dining room, employees discreetly watched. Ethan stood near the service station pretending to organize menus while listening to every word. Richard folded his hands neatly on the table. The Grand Meridian takes guest satisfaction very seriously. Maya studied him for a moment. His expensive watch reflected the chandelier light. His suit fit perfectly. His confidence filled the space around him. He was a man accustomed to authority. "That is good to hear," Maya said. "Then perhaps you would like to know why I wrote down your name." Richard's smile faded slightly. "My name." Maya opened her notebook. "Your waiter, the hostess, the shift supervisor. Now you." Richard glanced at the notebook. "May I ask why?" "Because patterns interest me." Richard leaned back. "Patterns?" "Yes." Maya closed the notebook again. "One mistake can happen anywhere. What happens afterward tells a different story." For the first time, Richard seemed less relaxed. "Are you suggesting there is a larger problem?" Maya looked around the dining room. A young black family had just been seated near the far corner. The father smiled politely at a server who barely acknowledged him before hurrying away. An older couple received warm conversation and extra attention 2 tables over. Small things. Easy things to miss. Unless you were looking. I think culture always reveals itself eventually, Maya said softly. Richard followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. With respect, ma'am, I believe you may be overanalyzing a simple misunderstanding. Maya nodded slowly. Perhaps. Richard sensed an opportunity and immediately took it. Exactly. We are one of the highest-rated hotels in Georgia. Thousands of guests stay here every year. We have won awards for service excellence. That is impressive, Maya replied. It is. Richard smiled again. Which is why I hope we can put this unfortunate situation behind us. Maya remained silent. The pause stretched longer than Richard expected. Nearby, Ethan watched anxiously. The manager's confidence usually ended conversations. Tonight, it seemed to be having the opposite effect. Finally, Maya asked another question. How long have you worked here? Richard appeared surprised. 14 years. That is a long time. I helped build much of what this hotel is today. Pride entered his voice. Then you probably know every corner of this building. I do. Maya nodded thoughtfully. And you probably know which employees create problems. Richard's expression hardened. I support my staff. Even when they are wrong? The question landed quietly between them. Richard glanced toward Ethan for the briefest moment. Maya noticed. So did Ethan. My employees work extremely hard, Richard said. They deserve trust. Trust is important, Maya agreed. So is accountability. Richard stood up. The conversation was no longer moving where he wanted. I believe we have addressed your concerns. Maya looked up at him. Have we? Richard forced another smile. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Then he turned and walked away. Across the room, Ethan immediately approached him. The two men exchanged a few hurried words. Richard listened, nodded once, then looked back toward Maya. His eyes narrowed slightly. Whatever he had just decided, it was not good. And for the first time that evening, Maya sensed that the real test had not begun yet. The atmosphere inside the restaurant shifted almost imperceptibly after Richard walked away. Nothing obvious. No raised voices. No confrontation. Yet Maya could feel it. The smiles from the staff seemed tighter now. Conversations between employees stopped whenever she looked in their direction. Even the hostess at the front podium appeared nervous. Maya finished her meal quietly and reached for her water glass. Across the dining room, the young black family she had noticed earlier waited nearly 15 minutes before anyone refilled their drinks. Meanwhile, a nearby table received constant attention. Fresh bread, friendly conversation, immediate service, small details, easy to dismiss one at a time, impossible to ignore when they formed a pattern. Maya opened her notebook again. The scratch of her pen against paper seemed louder than it should have. At the service station, Ethan noticed. His expression darkened immediately. He whispered something to another server. Both glanced toward Maya before looking away. A few minutes later, a woman in a hotel uniform approached her table. Her name tag read Stephanie. Unlike the others, her smile looked genuine. Ma'am, she said softly. Is there anything else I can get for you? Maya looked up. No, thank you. Stephanie hesitated. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. Maya studied her face. The woman seemed sincere. You did not do anything wrong. Stephanie lowered her voice. Maybe not. But sometimes people see what they want to see. Before Maya could respond, Stephanie quickly returned to work. The brief exchange lingered in Maya's mind. There was something in the woman's tone. Something cautious. Almost afraid. 10 minutes later, Maya requested the check. A different server delivered it. Not Ethan. Not Stephanie. The bill had been adjusted. A substantial service charge had been added despite the problems with the meal. Maya looked at it for several seconds. Then she smiled faintly. Another note went into the notebook. Nearby, Ethan saw her writing again and immediately walked toward the manager's office. This time he did not even try to hide it. Maya watched him disappear through a side hallway. Moments later, Richard emerged. His face remained professional, but the warmth was gone. He approached her table once more. "Is there another concern?" he asked. Maya handed him the bill. Richard glanced down. "The charges are correct." "Are they?" Maya asked. "Absolutely." Maya nodded slowly. "Interesting." Richard folded the bill and placed it back on the table. "At some point, ma'am, every issue stops being about service and becomes about looking for problems." The words hung in the air. Several nearby guests heard them. Maya noticed their reactions immediately. Some looked uncomfortable. Others appeared to agree with him. It was a familiar dynamic. The person asking questions slowly becoming the problem instead of the behavior being questioned. Richard seemed to sense the shift as well. His confidence returned. "The Grand Meridian has an excellent reputation," he continued. "One evening does not change that." Maya met his gaze. "You are right." Richard looked relieved. Then she added, "One evening does not create a culture either." The relief vanished. For a moment neither spoke. Rain had started outside. Tiny droplets traced silver paths down the enormous windows overlooking the city. The piano music had stopped. The dining room felt colder somehow. Richard finally straightened his jacket. "Perhaps this hotel is simply not the right fit for your expectations." Maya heard the meaning beneath the words. So did several guests nearby. She slowly closed her notebook and rose from her chair. The room became very quiet. Richard believed the conversation was finally over. He had no idea that before the sun rose the next morning, every decision made tonight would return to stand directly in front of him. The rain was falling harder now, turning the city lights beyond the glass into blurred streaks of gold and white. Maya picked up her handbag, slid the notebook inside, and prepared to leave. She could feel eyes following her across the dining room. Some curious, some relieved, some convinced they had just watched a difficult guest finally give up. Richard Walker seemed particularly satisfied. His posture relaxed for the first time all evening. Ethan stood near the service station with his arms folded, exchanging confident looks with another employee. To them, the situation was finished. Maya paused beside the hostess stand. "Have a good evening," the young hostess said automatically. Maya smiled warmly. "You too." Then she stepped into the lobby. The contrast was striking. The restaurant had felt tense. The lobby felt frozen. Massive chandeliers hung from the ceiling like floating constellations. A fountain trickled softly near the center of the room. Guests rolled expensive luggage across polished marble floors. Somewhere a pianist played a slow melody that echoed through the open space. Maya stopped near one of the tall windows overlooking the street. Raindrops tapped gently against the glass. She opened her notebook one final time and reviewed every name she had written down. Ethan Collins, Richard Walker, Stephanie, shift supervisor, hostess, kitchen manager, service delays, added charges, guest interactions, patterns, details, culture. She closed the notebook and slipped it into her bag. Behind the front desk, 2 employees were whispering. One glanced toward her and quickly looked away. The other laughed nervously. Maya had seen that behavior before in struggling companies. Employees learned what could be discussed openly and what could not. They learned who received support and who became expendable. They learned when silence was safer than honesty. Across the lobby, a television mounted above the bar displayed a business news channel. Maya barely noticed it until a familiar name appeared on the screen. Bennett Hospitality Group. A reporter discussed a major leadership transition scheduled to be announced the following morning. Most guests ignored it. One businessman glanced up briefly before returning to his phone. Maya watched for only a second before turning away. Near the entrance, a security officer approached. His expression was professional but uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "management has requested that I ask whether you still plan to remain on the property tonight." Maya looked at him kindly. The man seemed embarrassed even asking. "Yes," she said. I have a reservation. He nodded. Of course. Pause followed. For what it is worth, I am sorry your evening went the way it did. Maya smiled. Thank you. The officer walked away. Nearby, Richard had just stepped into the lobby. He noticed the exchange immediately. His expression tightened. For reasons he could not explain, the calm confidence of this woman unsettled him more with every passing minute. Most unhappy guests became emotional. Most demanded compensation. Most wanted attention. Maya wanted something else, and that worried him. Upstairs, in a quiet suite overlooking the city, a thick folder rested on a desk beside a signed contract. The documents inside would take effect at 8 o'clock the next morning. Less than 12 hours remained. Yet down in the lobby nobody knew that. Not Richard. Not Ethan. Not the employees whispering behind the front desk. They still believed they understood exactly who Maya Brooks was. And that misunderstanding was about to become the most expensive mistake of their careers. The city looked different just before dawn. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of her suite, Maya watched the last of the rain slide down the glass as Atlanta slowly woke beneath a blanket of pale gray light. The streets below were nearly empty. A few headlights moved through the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed briefly and disappeared. The hotel was quiet now. The arguments, assumptions, and forced smiles from the evening before felt far away. Maya stood alone holding a cup of coffee, its warmth spreading through her hands. On the desk behind her rested the folder that would change everything in less than 2 hours. She could have opened it again. She could have reviewed every page for the 100th time. Instead, she simply stared out at the city. Her thoughts kept returning to the employees she had met. Stephanie apologizing for something she did not do. The nervous hostess watching every conversation. The security officer who quietly offered kindness. Even Ethan and Richard occupied her thoughts. Not because of what they had said, because of what their behavior revealed. Culture was never built in a single day. It grew through habits, through permissions, through the things leaders tolerated. Downstairs, the first shift of the morning had already begun. Housekeepers pushed carts through silent hallways. Engineers checked equipment. Front desk agents prepared for the breakfast rush. Most of them had no idea a major announcement was coming. They simply arrived for work like they always did. Maya respected that. She had spent years visiting properties across the country. Luxury hotels, budget hotels, airport hotels, resort hotels. The buildings were different, but one truth remained the same. The people doing the hardest work usually received the least attention. A soft vibration pulled her from her thoughts. Her phone lit up. The message came from Charles Bennett. Everything ready? Maya smiled faintly and typed a short reply. Yes. Another message appeared seconds later. Big day. Maya looked toward the folder again. Big day indeed. She set the phone down and walked back to the desk. The signed documents sat neatly beside a company identification badge. Her photograph stared back at her from beneath the words Chief Executive Officer. The badge reflected the morning light. For a moment the room was completely silent. Maya remembered her first management job years ago. She remembered being overlooked in meetings, having her ideas ignored until someone else repeated them. She remembered learning that authority and leadership were not the same thing. Authority could be assigned. Leadership had to be earned. That lesson had shaped everything that followed. At exactly 7:30, she left the suite and entered the hallway. The hotel seemed almost peaceful. No one recognized her as she rode the elevator toward the executive conference floor. A few guests stepped inside during the descent. One businessman checked emails. A couple discussed sightseeing plans. Nobody paid attention to the woman standing quietly beside them. The elevator doors opened. Maya stepped out. The conference room at the end of the hall was already filling with department heads and senior managers. Inside, Richard Walker stood near the front of the room greeting people with confident handshakes. Ethan had been invited as an employee recognition representative and looked unusually proud of himself. Both men appeared relaxed, comfortable, certain about their place in the hotel. Neither noticed Maya approaching from the far end of the corridor. Not yet. But in only a few minutes, the assumptions they carried so confidently would begin to collapse one by one, and the notebook Maya had quietly filled the night before was about to become the most important document in the entire building. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as department heads settled into their seats. Coffee cups steamed beside leather notebooks. Laptops glowed across the long polished table. Richard Walker stood near the front speaking confidently about occupancy numbers and guest satisfaction scores. Every few seconds he checked his watch. The new leadership announcement was supposed to begin at 8 o'clock sharp. Ethan sat along the sidewall wearing his employee recognition badge with pride. He had spent the morning imagining opportunities, promotions, and praise. Neither man noticed the sudden silence spreading from the doorway behind them. It started with a few heads turning. Then more. Conversations stopped one after another. Richard frowned and looked toward the entrance. His smile vanished instantly. Maya Brooks had entered the room, not carrying a suitcase, not wearing the simple travel clothes from the night before. She walked calmly toward the front of the room in a tailored navy business suit. Around her neck hung a company identification badge. Several executives immediately stood to greet her. Richard stared, confused. Then he saw the badge. The words seemed impossible. Chief Executive Officer. For a moment the room felt frozen. Ethan blinked repeatedly as though his eyes were refusing to process what they saw. Maya reached the front of the room where Charles Bennett was waiting beside the presentation screen. The founder smiled warmly and extended his hand. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "Today I have the privilege of introducing the next leader of Bennett Hospitality Group." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Charles turned toward Maya. "Effective immediately, Maya Brooks will serve as Chief Executive Officer." The silence deepened. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Across the room, Ethan's mouth slowly fell open. The woman they had dismissed. The woman they had judged. The woman they had quietly tried to push out of the hotel less than 12 hours earlier now stood at the front of the room with authority over every person present. Maya thanked Charles and stepped forward. Her voice remained calm, professional, measured. "Before this meeting," she began, "I spent the last 24 hours as a regular guest inside this hotel." Several people shifted nervously. Richard could barely breathe. Maya continued, "I wanted to experience our culture firsthand, not through reports, not through surveys, through people." She opened her notebook and placed it on the table. The same notebook Richard had dismissed. The same notebook Ethan had laughed about. "What I found concerns me." Nobody interrupted. "I found excellent employees who cared deeply about guests. I found kindness from people whose names may never appear in company reports. I also found patterns that should concern every leader in this room." Her eyes moved briefly across the audience. They stopped on Richard, then Ethan. Neither could hold her gaze for long. "The issue was never a single meal," Maya said softly. "The issue was what happened afterward." The room remained silent. The truth had finally arrived. And for Richard Walker, the realization was far worse than embarrassment. It was the understanding that every choice he made the night before had revealed exactly who he was when he believed nobody important was watching. No one in the conference room seemed willing to move. The air itself felt heavy. Richard Walker sat perfectly still, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. Ethan stared at the polished table in front of him, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Around them, department heads exchanged uneasy glances. Maya let the silence settle before speaking again. She had learned long ago that people often revealed more during silence than during conversation. "I want to be very clear," she said. "This meeting is not about revenge." Several people looked up immediately. That was not what they expected to hear. Maya rested one hand lightly on the notebook. "If I wanted revenge, this would be a very short meeting." A nervous ripple moved through the room. "What concerns me is something much larger than a single interaction." The meal was replaced. The bill can be corrected. An apology can be given. Those things are easy. She paused. Culture is harder. Nobody disagreed. Charles Bennett watched quietly from the side of the room, allowing her to lead. Maya opened the notebook and turned several pages. Yesterday I observed employees who were kind, professional, and dedicated. I also observed situations where assumptions were made about guests before anyone took the time to know them. Her eyes moved across the room. The problem with assumptions is that eventually they become habits. And habits become culture. Richard lowered his head. Every word felt directed at him because he knew it was. Maya closed the notebook again. Some of you are probably wondering what happens next. The room remained silent. Here is what happens next. We improve. Several executives blinked in surprise. Ethan finally looked up. Maya continued. No one builds a better company through fear. Accountability matters. Standards matter. But people also deserve the opportunity to learn. The tension in the room shifted slightly. Not gone. Different. Maya turned toward Richard. Mr. Walker. His head lifted slowly. You have spent 14 years helping operate this property. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Yes. Do you care about this hotel? Richard swallowed. I do. Then prove it. Confusion crossed his face. Maya continued before he could respond. Beginning today, I want a complete review of guest service procedures. I want employee feedback collected anonymously. I want leadership training for every manager, including senior management. Richard stared at her. He had expected dismissal. He had expected humiliation. Instead, he was being handed responsibility. You are giving me that assignment? He asked quietly. I am giving you an opportunity, Maya replied. Across the room, Ethan looked even more uncomfortable. Maya turned toward him next. Mr. Collins. He immediately straightened. Yes, ma'am. You are talented. The statement surprised him. Your service record shows strong performance. Ethan blinked. Thank you. But talent without respect eventually becomes a liability. The words landed softly but firmly. Ethan lowered his eyes. For the first time since the meeting began, genuine regret appeared on his face. Maya did not raise her voice. She did not embarrass him. Somehow that made the lesson feel stronger. Every guest deserves dignity, she said. Not because of who they are. Not because of what they own. Because they are people. The room fell silent again. This time the silence felt different. Less fearful. More reflective. And for the first time since she entered the building, Maya sensed that the people in front of her were finally listening. 6 months later, the Grand Meridian felt like a different place. The marble floors still gleamed beneath the chandeliers. The fountain still whispered softly in the center of the lobby. The city skyline still stretched beyond the tall windows. Yet something important had changed. It was not the building. It was the people. A young family stepped through the front entrance on a bright Saturday afternoon. Their 2 children looked around with wide eyes as a bell attendant greeted them warmly. At the front desk, the hostess smiled and welcomed them by name before they even reached the counter. Nearby, a server stopped what he was doing to help an elderly guest find the restaurant. No one seemed rushed. No one seemed invisible. On the second-floor balcony overlooking the lobby, Maya stood quietly with a cup of coffee in her hands. Sunlight streamed through the glass, warming the polished rail beside her. She watched the movement below without saying a word. Beside her stood Charles Bennett, now officially retired. You changed this place, he said softly. Maya smiled faintly. The people changed it. Charles followed her gaze. Near the front desk, Stephanie was training a new employee. Her confidence had grown. Her kindness remained exactly the same. Across the lobby, Richard Walker spoke with a guest. He listened carefully, taking notes instead of making assumptions. The experience from that night had humbled him in ways no corporate seminar ever could. And in the restaurant, Ethan Collins carried a tray between tables. He had changed too, not because he feared consequences, because he finally understood something he had never questioned before. Every guest carried a story he could not see. Maya took a slow sip of coffee. The sounds of the hotel blended together around her. Rolling suitcases, quiet laughter, soft music from the lobby piano, the simple rhythm of people being treated with dignity. Her eyes drifted toward the large framed mission statement now displayed near the entrance. The final line caught the sunlight. Respect should never depend on status. Maya remembered the notebook that had started everything. It was locked away in her office now, not as evidence, as a reminder that